the grim darkness that is the far future, war machines rule the battlefield. The thunderous roar of engines, the rattle of tracks, and the flash of...
Wait! This thing doesn't shoot. This is Groundeffected. My name is your dad, and in this video, I'm gonna answer some questions you had about this tank. Let's address the Warhammer police. There was one or two people who decided that it was not okay for me to make a model into a RC tank. I don't care. And now that we got that out the way, I'd like to talk about the FPV of this vehicle. FPV stands for first person view, and this is something that you use in order to view out of the vehicle that you are remotely controlling. It's also a type of a camera viewpoint for when you're playing these shooting games. Now in my case, FPV means that I actually have a camera for first person viewing from the vehicle itself. The camera on this vehicle is connected to a TBS Nano. This VTX gives me a whopping 200 milliwatts of power for times when I want to drive my tank very far. And this will help when you want to drive the tank in another room. When it comes to battery power, I'm using this Djinn LiPo. This is a 300 milliamp ATC LiPo battery. This is what is known as a high voltage battery. It means that this battery can actually be charged up to more than 4.2 volts per cell. Now I know that's a lot of technical mumbo-jumbo, but basically all that means is that that particular battery can be overcharged, and in this case it means nothing. We don't use that overcharging capability at all. It's the only battery I had that was this big that I could fit in my tank. So the servos that I used in this build are the ones that are driving the tracks. And basically the servos are continually rotating servos, which means that they don't have a potentiometer in them or any kind of limiter to stop the servo from only turning 180 degrees like a normal servo. And yes, I realize that servos don't only turn 180 degrees, some are only 60 degrees. Servos come in many different shapes and sizes. And this was actually another point of contention in the comments. It wasn't a major thing, however, I feel like I need to address this. There is a way for you to create a continually rotating servo out of a normal servo. You don't have to buy them, but in my case, it was a lot easier for me to just buy servos that would fit my tank and work straight out the box. One of the bigger worries for me was that the servos themselves could only push 25 grams at full voltage. Without making this video way too boring and going too technical on things, full voltage in our case is actually 7.4 volts coming out of a 2-cell LiPo. And in my case, I wanted to make sure that there was a constant 5 volts delivered to the servos at all times. I didn't want them going slower when the battery started to deplete. This is why I used a 7.2 volt LiPo or 2-cell LiPo. Very importantly, I am using more power technically than what the servos or the receiver can handle. So in order to tame all that massive power coming out of this battery, I used a step down unit. This is a 5 volt step down unit. They can be bought for very cheap online. I bought this many months ago when I was building something for my first person view drone stuff, and it was just lying around, so I didn't spend any money on that. And speaking of money, now would be a really good time for me to kind of go over actually what the cost of something like this is. If you have none of the parts and you're going out to buy all these things from scratch, it's going to be hella expensive. And this is because I used a very specific radio which doesn't need to be used for this. I also used very expensive goggles which I use for other hobbies. So if you're gonna start out, you can probably get cheaper items to make this tank work. But if we're pricing things based on the items that I used, it's around £600 just for the goggles and about maybe £250 for the radio alone. Now of course I understand that people probably can't afford these kind of things, and I get that. But one of the comments that kept popping up is how Games Workshop is making so much out of us as hobbyists that they should give it to us for free. And I'm not gonna lie, it cost me at least 5 tanks worth just for the frickin' radio for this thing. And it's a good thing that I spoke about the radio, because the radio is driving that little receiver at the bottom of those servos. That receiver is a normal FR Sky receiver, and this was actually given to me by George. You can check out George's channel in the description below. George and I fly drones together, and this is the reason I have the knowledge to build RC stuff. This is also leads me on to the reason why I decided not to use Arduino for this project, and that is because I have no idea how to code things. None of this tank was coded. There was no special fancy computer typing. There was no magical words going in the background. It was literally just RC, remote control. I have a radio. The radio connects to the receiver, and the receiver puts out a signal that the radio tells it to do. It's basically Arduino and all the rest of it combined into one simple package. And the reason I chose to use these electronics specifically is just because of how easy it would fit inside my tank and make my life a whole lot easier putting this together. Same with the battery. It was literally just because it fitted in the tank exactly as I needed to fit. There is no specific reason. They don't have to be these specific parts. You can still do this even if you don't have these parts. I have noticed people online doing this with the larger servos. I tried with the larger servos. It's really hard to fit them in. And congratulate those people who fit them in. But a little bit of grinding gets you a long way. Let me show you how the FPV part of this vehicle works. I just want to show you what it looks like in the camera. It's not amazing, and this is why I didn't use a lot of that footage in the video when I made it. So this is just a Spectrum screen. There is nothing too fancy about this, but it has a module in here which is 5.8 gigahertz, and it has an antenna which you can use to pick up the signal coming out of the VTX in here. Once the battery is plugged in, this specific monitor will actually search for a signal coming out of this vehicle. It will search for a signal coming out of anything that is 5.8, and it just so happens that because I have a very strong signal coming out of this, it will pick it up and I won't have to actually search for it manually. However, you're able to set the video transmitter to any channel that this monitor can actually pick up. And as you can see, this is the view from inside of the tank. You can actually see the camera actually shows a little bit of the tracks on the front of the tank, which helps with the immersion. And as you can see, this tank is in full real time. It will literally be a couple of milliseconds behind real time. So it means that I could technically drive this tank at really high speeds and still have full accuracy over where it's going. And what you'll notice is that I can go all the way to the other side of my building with it. Some people mentioned that I didn't actually show off the FPV enough. And realistically, I know I didn't, but I'm showing it now. I have a little LED that's coming out of it. That same LED board has got a voltage meter on it. And this is showing me that the battery is flat. It's not completely flat, but it's pretty dead at the moment. And if the light is flashing red, this means that I need to charge the battery. In general, the light will flash a horrible green. I wish it was blue, but green is what I got and it's what I used. One unfortunate drawback of using FPV is that these VTXs get really hot, and of course if it's inside of this tank covered up with everything, you probably don't want to be running that VTX for way too long. So this kind of tank is not something that you would use for an entire game. We should also talk about the treads of these tanks, and I used my Anycubic M3 Plus in order to print the treads that I used on this tank. And since the treads are actually printed in resin, they're actually not as strong as they could possibly be. I actually make a mix with my resins. I use a standard resin mixed with Tenacious from Seriatech, and this makes my resin a little bit more flexible, and I think this is what made it last a little bit longer on my tank. I have to admit, I don't think they're gonna last forever. This is not a forever tank, and in fact, I was asked a couple of times whether I would make some kits, and I don't think this is the way to make a tank that will last forever. Unfortunately, over time, the more I use the tank, the more those pieces of resin wear down, and it starts to not work as well. And technically, I would have to print a whole nother tread, probably print 2 new treads, which is a nightmare. It takes so much work putting them together, as well as taking them off the friggin' printer. Honestly, I don't think I would do that. If anything, I would probably think or consider maybe molding the tracks. I'm not really sure how I would do that. I'm gonna think about this a bit more in the future, and if I can figure out how I can possibly make this a kit that I could probably sell and help people to build their own personal tanks, I will. If I can't figure it out, then I would rather not deliver a product that is just not up to scratch. That being said, maybe you would have better luck printing these treads in PLA or something like ABS that's a little bit stronger, as well as the gears and everything. The only thing that I had a problem with printing them in that was that they just didn't look as crispy as I wanted them to look. I wanted it to be completely seamless. I didn't want anyone to think that parts of this tank was 3D printed at all. Same with the camera. This is why I mounted the camera with a piece of the weapon that was on this tank. I even painted the lens because I just thought it would be cool. It helped to add to the overall feel of this model, and it didn't look like it was some kind of toy tank. It looks like a Warhammer model. It looks like a model that doesn't do anything, and that's what I like about it. It's the fact that I can make this drive, and I can drive it from another room, and that is pretty cool. I guess I should address the Warhammer drama, and of course, it isn't really drama at all. All it is that some people think that I can only do one or the other thing on my channel. I'm gonna do all the things on my channel, and it doesn't really matter what you think because it's my channel. Of course, if you like things that are remote controlled, warhammered, or even coming out of your 3D printer, then this channel is probably the channel for you. Make sure to like, subscribe, and if you want to, share it with your gran. And as for the painting of this bad boy, if you'd like to find out how I painted it, the best thing you can do is join my Patreon. This leads me over to the segue about Patreon. Patreon is a place where you can support me as an artist. If you watch my videos and you find the information in my videos helpful and you've used it, perhaps you might want to consider supporting me. It's because of the support from my Patreons that I'm able to continue making videos. I would like to say a super special thank you to those Patreons who have supported me. There are other ways for you to support me, and this is if you watch the next video and also if you share a video with your gran. If you have any other questions, make sure to leave them and I will do my best to answer them. Yes, I am considering making another tank. I've been looking into a couple of cool ideas on what I can do to take it just a little bit further, and hopefully you will stick around to see that in the future. This is the time where I need to say, if you didn't like anything you saw in any of my videos, the best thing I can say for you is actually just f*** off. Now I'm gonna get back to painting this massive statue I have in the background.